on the occasion of the first anniversary of Kim Ji-ho's death. A reappraisal of Kim Ji-ho's thought as a philosophy of reconciliation and coexistence has recently come to the fore. Kim Ji-ho's thought, which suffered a severe ordeal first from the conservatives and a second time from the progressives, was throughout his life constantly misunderstood on account of the blunt truths that were welcomed by neither the progressive nor the conservative camp. Yet after his death its value is now being reappraised. That Kim Ji-ho's thought was misunderstood had its cause not only in his career, which crossed back and forth between progressive and conservative, but also in his manner of expressing his thought, which he articulated through aesthetic and artistic expressions ranging across the many fields of East and West, past and present. In general, the ideological transformation of Kim Ji-ho is broadly divided into the materialist nationalist. He was when first made known to the world, through Five Bandits, the philosopher of life who waged the Ilria movement, and, in his later years, the aesthetic thinker of the Gap thought, and of Hunjiunul. However, although his thought is highly creative in its mode of expression, it is not easy to grasp what consistency there is to his ideological changes, so much so that he himself even recommended to acquaintances the writings of Hong Yang-hui, who wrote the first doctoral dissertation on him, and conducted the last interview with him as an introduction to his own theory. Although his thought was understood merely as the aesthetic discourse of a practical thinker, rather than as the thought of a systematic theorist, there is an atmosphere of agreement at the memorial academic conferences of both the left and right camps, that his thought was consistently one of reconciliation and coexistence toward the left and right camps alike, and it therefore shows the possibility of being consistently re-illuminated from the standpoint of coexistence. Kim Ji-ho's thought of reconciliation and coexistence, having stood at the center of controversy throughout his life, as he crossed back and forth between the left and right camps, is also evaluated in ways split into two extremes. Although his thought is sometimes disparaged in the progressive camp as the very model of opportunism, all agree that, with regard to reconciliation and coexistence, his contribution left a great achievement in reconciliation and coexistence, with the most difficult object of all the past one wishes to hide, and the shameful tradition. One of the reasons Kim Ji-ho's philosophy of life stirred so much controversy is that the philosophy of life, today, was not confined to a single philosophy of the domain of life, but could become a vast paradigm shift in the human and social sciences, which had been weighted toward materialism. Indeed, just as Kim Ji-ho had anticipated, after postmodernism, the philosophy of life became a vast new paradigm of the human and social sciences that replaced materialism. Among the philosophies of life in today's human and social sciences, Kim Ji-ho's philosophy of life has been positioned as the self-generated philosophy of life of a thinker representative of Korean materialism, and has thus become especially controversial. Although Kim Ji-ho left much controversy in ideological terms, in the culture and arts of seeing, hearing, speaking, and moving, he revived lost methods as though reuniting a family that had parted through domestic discord. It is from Kim Ji-ho that the mask dance, Madang Nori Gakuk Pansori, Salpuri dance, and the like familiar to us today escaped from the shameful blemish one wished to hide, like third-generation black people, and came to be reconciled as arts that act successfully upon our eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. That the much-debated thought of Kim Ji-ho was realized as art within everyday life, is what differentiates it from ordinary thought. The printmaking art of Oyin, the Salpuri dance of Rieju, the Pansori of Im Jin-tak, the mask dance of Chai Hui-wan, the Gakuk of Kim Young-dong, Namgak, and Pungmul, the popular songs of Cho Yeon-pil, and the like. When we today, wearied by westernized culture and art, wish to rest even a little, what allows us to rest is the many kinds of national art created under the influence of Kim Ji-ho. In fact, before Kim Ji-ho, national cultural art was in a state where scarcely more than its name was transmitted, and only after his narrative poems represented by Five Bandits did national cultural art come to be noticed by social activists as a tool usable for changing daily life, and thus became revitalized. The contribution of national cultural art to Korean democratization, almost the only successful case amid colonial circumstances, was exceptional, and needs to be reappraised. Therefore, Although Kim Ji-ho's thought of reconciliation and coexistence has hitherto been discussed mainly in the fields of thought and literature, it needs to be reappraised in the field of culture and art, where his influence appears most directly. Kim Ji-ha left a vast autobiography and also published voluminous theoretical works explaining in various ways the occasions of his ideological changes. And although there have been countless studies of him, amid the absence of any consistent theory of Kim Ji-ho's ideological changes that could dramatically alter the assessment of him, various discussions unfolded on the occasion of the first anniversary of his death. Although reappraisals of Kim Ji-ho's thought were made in various ways at the diverse academic conferences held during the first year after his death, discussions that explained his ideological changes, through a comparison of Donghak thought and Jungsin thought which frequently appear in Kim Ji-ho's thought are rare. That, despite the clear fact that Donghak thought and Jungsin thought greatly influenced Kim Ji-ho's thought, the influences of the two systems of thought have not been compared, is due in some part to the fact that even within Donghak thought and Jungsin thought themselves, the comparison of the two has not been much studied. Synthesizing the above discussion, in that Kim Ji-ho's philosophy of life synthesizes the great transformation of the paradigm of the human and social sciences, and is a self-generated philosophy of life reflecting the changes in Korean thought, represented by Donghak and Jungsin thought. The study of Kim Ji-ho's philosophy of life needs to be furnished with a more universal theoretical framework that has not previously been studied. Therefore, this paper seeks to present liminality and revitalization, anthropological methods discussed in the field of national cultural art as concepts for studying the consistency of Kim Ji-ho's thought. This paper seeks, in particular, to apply these two concepts to a comparison of Donghak thought and Jungsin thought, frequently mentioned as the thought that influenced him, and thereby to examine the consistency manifested in the transformation of Kim Ji-ho's thought. Indeed, although there have been representative studies in the fields of literature and thought concerning the consistency of Kim Ji-ho's thought such as From Burning Thirst to the Sea of Life, and The Unity of God and Revolution, cases analyzed with an anthropological framework are rare. Liminality, which set out from the meaning of threshold, was originally a field of anthropology, that of the rite of passage that appears commonly across the cultures of the world. Liminality was a term denoting the ambiguous intermediate state, like a threshold, that appears in the process of passage. What makes this concept of liminality useful for reconciliation and coexistence is that, just as countless rites of passage are carried out in this ambiguous intermediate state, so to the change that is reconciliation and coexistence is accomplished. In the end, liminality became the standard of debordering that serves as the basis of change, and after Victor Turner, who introduced liminality into the theory of rites of passage, anthropology, which had studied the cultures of primitive peoples, expanded into an analytical framework for contemporary everyday culture, encompassing countless works of modern theater, and even national art. Even Irving Goffman's theory that all everyday life is theater is variously applied in the field of drama therapy. Today, the theory of liminality has become a powerful theoretical framework capable of countering the traditional Aristotelian theory of catharsis after Nietzsche, and has become a concept that comprehensively encompasses Brecht's theory of the alienation drama, and Artaud's theory of the theater of cruelty, which had been proposed as alternatives to Aristotelian theory. Just as the theory of liminality began in the part concerning the application of anthropological theory to modern drama, the analysis of the thought of Kim Ji-ha, a playwright, through liminality has likewise been reinterpreted from the study of drama. It was also from Kim Ik-doo, a scholar of Korean drama theory, that the concept of liminality was taken note of as a clue for interpreting Kim Ji-ho's thought. Kim Ik-doo, introducing to Korea the theoretical works of Victor Turner, the theorist of liminality, drew out the ideological characteristics of Korean art such as Magangguk Namgak and Pungmulgut. Interacting with Kim Ji-ha, Kim Ik-doo proposed liminality as a concept for understanding Kim Ji-ho's thought, and, regarding the Donghak and Jungsin thought, that influenced his thought as well, pursued their point of connection through the concepts of Donghak and Junghak, centered on that liminality. Kim Ik-doo has stated that the significance of Kim Ji-ho's thought lies in the fact that the liminality of reconciliation and coexistence which could not, in the end, be found through the worldview of Aristotle's conflict-based drama, at the place where postmodernism, which had many similarities with Kim Ji-ho's thought, finally failed, can be found in Kim Ji-ho's Eastern liminality. And that this liminality can be found within Kim Ji-ho's thought, as it moves from Sun's Donghak to Jiang Xin's Zhenghak. Indeed, Kim Ji-ha is today spoken of as the progenitor of K literature. Revitalization is a concept in which liminality is further expanded, and it explains the process by which liminality changes into a national movement. Although Donghak thought and Junxin thought are different systems of thought, they have in common a characteristic shared with other colonial cultural movements that reinterpreted and revitalized national culture as liminality during the colonial era. The national cultural revival movement, through the reinterpretation of national culture in the colonial era, has hitherto been explained in anthropology by the theories of liminality and revitalization. The liminal performing arts culture, such as the Korean Madangguk, which Kim Ji-ha noticed early on, was noticed like China's Peking opera as an alternative to Western art, and Kim Ji-ho's thought, which began from open art forms such as the Madangguk and the narrative poem, is consistently reflected thereafter in his philosophy of life and elsewhere. Although Kim Ji-ha did not, during his lifetime, explain his thought with attention to the concept of liminality, he left the traces of many liminal concepts, such as Namjoseon and Hunjiunul. This paper is one that seeks, on the basis of the concept of liminality in Kim Ji-ho's thought, discovered by Kim Ik-do, to interpret the consistency manifested in the transformation of Kim Ji-ho's thought as the process of transformation of the Donghak thought and Junxin thought that influenced his thought. Although studies analyzing Kim Ji-ho's thought with the concept of liminality have been attempted since Kim Ik-do, this paper, unlike existing studies, seeks to examine the process of change of Kim Ji-ho's thought by adding the process of change from Donghak thought to Junxin thought. Revitalization is a theory holding that, in situations of cultural crisis such as colonial circumstances, there commonly appears, culturally, the shared feature whereby a national culture, like a rite of passage, is revived so as to overcome the crisis. This is because revitalization is a useful concept that can provide the historical background for applying the theory of liminality to the analysis of the thought of a colonized country such as Korea. Although Donghak thought and Junxin thought are systems of thought that influenced the formation of Kim Ji-ho's thought, in the larger framework, the national cultural artistic revival that Kim Ji-ha achieved is rather, to a great extent, an achievement of reinterpreting Donghak thought and Junxin thought. This paper seeks to understand the Donghak thought that influenced Kim Ji-ho's thought by the concept of liminality, and Junxin thought by the continuity of revitalization that completed that concept of liminality, and thus to interpret the process of transformation of Kim Ji-ho's thought through the theory of the revitalization of liminality. If Donghak thought is reappraised as an alternative modernity and paralleled in world history, then the Donghak peasant movement is being reappraised as even the first popular event in world history, surpassing the French Revolution. Indeed, today, when the hidden reality of the French Revolution is coming to light, there even emerge appraisals holding that, contrary to what has hitherto been known, the actual beginning of modernity was not the French Revolution, but the Donghak peasant movement. What is pointed to as the detonator of transformation in the Donghak thought that became the occasion of the Donghak peasant movement is the liminality manifested in Donghak thought. What first turned Kim Ji-ha toward the philosophy of life was Handel's thought of the three reverences, but what he began as the practical basis of the philosophy of life was the Catholic thought of Teilhard de Chardin, and practiced through Catholicism. However, just as Donghak, too, created a new self-generated system of thought, under the influence of the Catholicism, then called Sahak, Kim Ji-ho's philosophy of life was likewise once again converted into the self-generated philosophy of life of Donghak. The theory of liminality was at first a concept of cultural anthropology that set out from the theory of ritual and rite, that is the rite of passage, but it is a term that was expanded by Victor Turner into a universal concept, applied across the whole of social and cultural change. Victor Turner's theory of liminality is broadly classified into liminality and communitas. Liminality is a term first coined by Arnold van Gennep. The Latin limen is a word denoting the threshold, the boundary region moving from the first stage of the rite of passage to the second, that is, from separation to transition, and liminality is a term derived from limen. Liminality, by momentarily departing from value, possesses an ambiguous, indeterminate, and vague attribute. For this reason, liminality is frequently likened to death, the womb, darkness, androgyny, desolation, solar and lunar eclipses, and the like. Victor Turner, while studying a certain African tribe, came to discover a peculiar fact. The members of that tribe were brave, strong, and responsible. What he came to learn through the village's traditional coming-of-age ceremony for 13-year-old boys was that, at an appropriate time, adult men would secretly enter the sleeping quarters, wrap the boys in cloth, and abduct them. They take them to a place entirely unknown to them, and then disappear. The place into which these children are thrown is precisely liminality. Thrown into a crisis they have never before undergone, the children come to realize that they have been cast into mountains whose surroundings they know nothing of. At first they weep and wail in confusion, but their weeping does not bring their parents. The elders of the tribe visit once a month to ask after them and give advice. Amid such an environment, the children learn how to survive. The children learn a very strong sense of cooperation, comradeship, and solidarity. If we are to survive here, we must band together and come to have an intense sense of social solidarity and belonging. After undergoing such a process, they return to the village and perform the coming-of-age ceremony. The community in which the children, before undergoing the coming-of-age rite, thus learn while surviving together on their own as members of a community, is called communitas. Victor Turner's concept of the social drama is a reinterpretation of the rite of passage theory of the folklorist anthropologist Arnold van Gennep. According to van Gennep, human beings experience rites of passage when they face a crisis of survival, or when they pass through unfamiliar territory, or undergo a change of status. The rite of passage includes the process of separation, transition, incorporation. The cultural anthropologist Victor Turner regarded van Gennep's concept of the rite of passage as a socially universal principle and structure, not merely as ritual. Victor Turner expanded van Gennep's concept of the rite of passage into all domains of society, culture, and religion, and called it the social drama. Victor Turner's social drama is expanded into something that functions like myth for Iliad. However, whereas for Iliad myth is a story related to a single sacred age, Turner argued that myth serves present-day psychological and social purposes by broadly furnishing experiences that lie astride the boundary of consciousness. This is the same as accepting the argument of the ritualist school in mythology. Whereas the ritualist school connected myth and ritual in order to justify ritual itself, Turner connects ritual and myth, with a focus on the point that myth and ritual alike perform the psychological function of helping one pass more smoothly through the painful transitional processes of life. That Victor Turner's theory of social drama draws attention in the interpretation of crisis situations is due to the point that it informs us, most comprehensively yet in most detail, of the method of overcoming crisis. Today, communitas is applied not only to ritual, but to domains such as society, politics, religion, culture, and art. Victor Turner states that the social drama is a theory explaining the changes of a universal socio-cultural phenomenon occurring worldwide. According to Victor Turner, all social dramas and conflicts pass through the dialectic of structure, anti-structure, structure, and, concretely, through the stages of breach, crisis, redress, healing, reintegration, schism. Whereas van Gennep concentrated his interest on the rites performed at life's crises, for example, coming-of-age ceremonies, weddings, funerals, childbirth, and pregnancy, Victor Turner took note of the fact that most rites and events possess the process or form of passage. In short, Victor Turner came to take an interest in the second of the three stages, transition, that is, in the time-space of the threshold or dorsal placed on the boundary line, that is neither this stage nor that stage, and, thinking that this second stage, transition, was the key to resolving calamity, he began his study of the symbolic system of ritual in earnest, employing terms such as limen, liminality, liminoid, communitas, anti-structure, and the cultural subjunctive. Communitas is a term concerning human interrelationality, and Victor Turner presented two types of human relationality, the juxtapositional interrelation, and the either-or interrelation. The former refers to the structural state of existing society, that is, the structured and differentiated social mode of political, legal, and economic status, while the latter denotes the relatively undifferentiated social mode in which, at the transitional phase of ritual, organization is not complete. The latter corresponds precisely to anti-structure. In this sense, communitas may be said to be a destructured community in a state of anti-structure that transcends the dimension of structure, or of non-structure that has abolished structure. Communitas and liminality, which constitute anti-structure, are closely related yet distinguished. Liminality concerns the modes of being, situations, and conditions of individuals or groups. By contrast, communitas concerns the mode of human interrelation revealed in liminality. Liminality is an intermediate state and process, filled with all possibilities and latent power, that one passes through in order to depart from an existing social, cultural, or symbolic system, or order, lose one's former status, and be reincorporated into a new system. Communitas is essentially a relationship among individuals of a concrete and distinctive nature. Such individuals are not divided by role or status, but form free relationships among themselves. The characteristics of anti-structure are as follows. First, anonymity. Within communitas, human beings generally become anonymous beings. The participants in the ritual are represented as possessionless, wearing identical dress. All the secular marks of identification they had held in existing society, status, property, occupation, rank, standing, privilege, and the like, disappear, or are homogenized. Second, equality. In a state where existing social status and standing have all been nullified, a strong sense of comradeship and equality is fostered among the initiates, and egalitarianism is actively accepted. Third, the paradoxical power of the weak. In the anti-structural situation, social roles and authority are reversed, and there appears the phenomenon whereby the weak seize authority, and the strong are deprived of it. A person of low standing rises to a high position, or a person of low standing or status comes to possess, permanently or temporarily, a sacred attribute. This has as its purpose the framing of society's mode of existence. The world of anonymity and equality that liminality and communitas show has points of similarity with the world shown by René Girard's scapegoat theory, but it presents new points as well. Like the age of disorder that requires liminality, Girard's scapegoat theory held that when mimetic desire becomes rampant in society, and difference and order disappear, a scapegoat is created, and only after the scapegoat has died is order restored. However, the theory of liminality differs from scapegoat theory in that it regards the period requiring a scapegoat as a period of development through passage, and likewise regards the rite of passage as a process of development. After Victor Turner's death, his wife Edith Turner further expanded the scope of application of communitas, explaining that it appears in nearly all domains of life. She presented not only the communitas found in rites of passage, festivals, music, and sports, but also new categories such as the communitas of work, of liberation, of resistance, and of disaster. What makes liminality important in a crisis situation is the redress healing stage among the first stages of the social drama: breach, crisis, redress healing, reintegration, schism. Today, what most greatly influences redress healing in the social drama is the various media of society, including social networking services. However, what comes to the fore when the media of society alone cannot resolve conflict, as with COVID-19, is liminality. For theorists of liminality, liminality is regarded as a keyword that encompasses the contemporary Eastern and Western thought that criticizes modernity. Li Young-Ren presents Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of the body, Derrida's deconstruction, Whitehead's process philosophy, Deleuze's philosophy of becoming, Kim Sang-il's Han thought, and Korean Sundu thought, as integrated within the theory of liminality. What Dong Hak presented differently from existing Eastern thought, and by which it could draw attention as liminality, is said to be the bearing serving of Sichinaju. Although it took the same transcendent God as its object of faith, What made it different from Sahak is that Donghak bore the transcendent God into its own interior, and thereby created a domain of liminality. The so-called intermediate domain between transcendence and immanence is born in Donghak's Sichinaju. Through this, the Sichinaju practice and Donghak thought as a rite of passage, resolving the countless problems of the time, are born. In the process of change of Kim Ji-hwa's thought, too, this moment of bearing serving appears as a very important moment. The starting point of Kim Ji-hwa's art and thought is also said to have set out, contrary to what is generally expected, from surrealism. Although as a practitioner he did not present a systematic theory, from early on he boasted an enormous volume of reading. That he completed 5 bandits in a mere 3 days is said to have been a concentration of his prior reading. Narrative poems such as 5 Bandits were the fruit of his long effort, begun in high school, to link surrealism with Korean tradition. Kim Ji-hwa's attempt to link surrealism and tradition may be regarded as the beginning of the liminality manifested in his thought, as it subsequently unfolded. Through the narrative poem, Kim Ji-hwa sought to realize an intermediate form between surrealism, an extreme form of Western development, and pansori, the acme of Eastern art, and this model was expanded and came to be inherited by his juniors, such as Oh Yin, Im Jin-tak, Kim Young-dong, Lee Ae-ju, and Chai Hui-won. The continuity of Kim Ji-hwa's philosophy of life can also be found in his early attempt to seek the liminality of surrealism and national tradition. The clue to Kim Ji-hwa's philosophy of life is his famous encounter with Donghak thought. The 3 reverences thought of Hal Cho Si-hyung through the grass that blooms within his solitary prison cell. Although Kim Ji-hwa was not a materialist, in an age when the opposition between materialism and idealism arose as a problem of existence, what healed his physical and mental illness in the solitary cell was the vitality of the grass, that is, the tree of heaven, that took root on the cement floor of the solitary cell. And the 3 reverences thought of the Donghak practitioner, Hal Cho Si-hyung, who sought to bear serve the vitality of that grass. Donghak, which had borne God in the mind, developed by Han's time into the liminal stage of bearing serving life, and in this intermediate state Kim Ji-hwa experienced a state like that of the limitless and the supreme ultimate before the first differentiation, and, as in other rites of passage, in this intermediate state Kim Ji-hwa's illness was healed, and this healing power he called life. Kim Ji-hwa once again experienced what Donghak thought had done in curing the illnesses of the many common people of that time. The existential opposition between materialism and idealism was a problem that could be resolved in life. Kim Ji-hwa's experience in the solitary cell was like the contemporary philosophy that speaks of a turn from materialism to language, quite a Copernican turn, and the philosophy of life that Kim Ji-hwa experienced is today evaluated as a self-generated philosophy of life. Although the philosophy of life that Kim Ji-hwa first presented at the time was very unfamiliar, it was a turn close to foresight in today's world, where ecology and environment have become the mainstream of popular movements. In particular, Kim Ji-hwa's philosophy of life was valuable in that it was a Korean self-generated philosophy of life, capable of responding to the countless philosophies of life of the West. The position that Kim Ji-hwa's philosophy of life occupies in today's philosophy of life has been well organized by Lee Jang-bai, although the genealogy of Kim Ji-hwa's philosophy of life is rooted in Donghak. The connection between Kim Ji-hwa's philosophy of life and yet another self-generated philosophy of life draws attention. If we seek, diachronically in the past, the philosophy of life related to Kim Ji-hwa's philosophy of life, it is connected with the life movement of Mu Wai-dang Jang-il-sun, and although this is said to originate in the Catholic philosophy of life, there had already been the philosophy of life of the Yu Young-mo and Ham Suk-hien lineage. If we link the philosophy of life of the Yu Young-mo and Ham Suk-hien lineage with Kim Ji-hwa's thought, both systems of thought are connected to Eastern tradition, in particular, to the thought of connection of Zhuangzi. Although Ham Suk-hien was a disciple of Yu Young-no, the two were also influenced by the non-church movement of Japan's Sakimura Kanzo and the indigenous interpretation of Christianity, that is, the interpretation connected with Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, and with Zhuangzi is also connected with Cho Mansik, who influenced Yu Young-mo. Although Huayan and the Yurjing make connection center on harmony and coexistence, both, with their symmetry and correlative thinking, show a difference from the West. If we examine synchronically the philosophy of life related to Kim Ji-ha's philosophy of life, we may cite the seemingly unrelated Yil Manyal. Professor Jang Jin-hong of Seoul National University, a representative Korean scholar of religion, organized the history of Korean religion into the Buddhism of mythos, the Confucianism of logos, and the Donghak of theos, and viewed the development of Protestantism after liberation as an extension of Donghak, holding that Donghak inherits this. From Jang Jin-hong's viewpoint, Lee Manyal, a renowned Protestant-themed novelist, may be said to have stood in the same position as Kim Ji-ha, from the standpoint of the inheritance of Donghak. Besides Yil Manyal, another writer who may be contrasted with Kim Ji-ha's philosophy of life is Park No-hya. Park No-hya, who, as a worker, displayed literary ability equal to Kim Ji-ha's, after long imprisonment like Kim Ji-ha's, transformed unlike Kim Ji-ha into a peace activist. What made Kim Ji-ha different from Lee Manyal, or Park No-hya, is that he found the roots of his own thought in Donghak thought and Jungsin thought. From the standpoint of liminality, as Jang Jin-hong mentioned, Kim Ji-ha's position has significance in that the Donghak and Jungsin thought he chose secured the continuity of the liminality of Korean thought. If we expand Jang Jin-hong's theory and connect it with Deleuze's theory, we may conceive a Korean theory of harmony and coexistence. Deleuze divided the harmony that is life on the basis of Kant's theory into connection, disjunction, and conjunction, and these, according to Jang Jin-hong's principle, can be connected respectively to the Eastern Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. As appears in the change of Korean thought from Donghak to Jangsin, the meaning of harmony in Kim Ji-ha's thought can be examined as having developed from harmony to coexistence. The liminality manifested in Kim Ji-ha's thought as it appears in the concept of life continuously appears thereafter in Yulrya, Hunjiunul Bak Namnyik, and the like. Each concept is a concept in which the practical attribute is further strengthened. Liminality, which carries the meaning of boundary, is expanded into a concept of the limit situation, like that of existentialism. Lee Gang-ha, who has interpreted Kim Ji-ha's poetic world through liminality, interprets the limit situation in the three domains of Kant's epistemology, existentialism's ontology, and the axiology of homo sacer and, on the axiological side, says that liminality appears as homo sacer, the marginal person of society, so that Kim Ji-ha's poetic world appears as a ceaseless dialogue with this homo sacer. Liminality, presented as a rite of passage solution to the limit situation, is today being expanded even into a single concept that unifies the theories of various contemporary thinkers. Lee Young-ran, an actress and theater theorist, integrates within the theory of liminality the various contemporary systems of thought, summarized by Li Jiangbai. As is said of the ancient city, liminality becomes the detonator that creates the culture of a new age, and what Kim Ji-ha discovered through the philosophy of life is the task of completing this through revitalization. Kim Ji-ha, upon being released from prison, presented the Yulrya thought. Yulrya is a law corresponding to the harmony of Eastern music in a cosmos infinitely nested as the lesser supreme ultimate and the greater supreme ultimate. Its function is that of attuning all things by rhythm, like a metronome that tunes all the instruments of an orchestra. Kim Mimi summarizes as follows, in a paper on the history of scholarship, the process by which Kim Ji-ha's thought reached all the way to Yulrya, after passing from the life of Donghak through the life of Catholicism. That Kim Ji-ha took note of Yulrya is because he regarded the Jungyik thought of Kim Il-bu, the source of Kim Ji-ha's Yulrya, as the Yurjing studies unfolding of Donghak. Regarding the reason the Donghak peasant revolution, in which Donghak unfolded, failed as the absence of theory, what was presented as the alternative was Jungyik thought, the Yurjing studies unfolding of Donghak. The failure of the Donghak peasant movement brought about the paradoxical result that Donghak thought, which had asserted life, took away the most lives. Donghak thought, meeting the new liminality of the machine gun used for the first time in the world, was once again placed at a moment of decision. In fact, after the modernization period, the East Asians of Korea, China, and Japan were in a continuous series of limit situations. Without sufficient information, they always had to encounter new problems and were routinely driven into an ultimate limit situation in which survival was guaranteed, only if they resolved those problems. Problem solving by traditional correlative thinking no longer held good in the new environment of modernity, and, before the harsh new reality of capitalism, one's identity and existence were placed in a limit situation, under a tradition powerless to respond. In a situation where even Dong Hak, presented as an alternative, had rather enlarged the problem, an alternative was very urgently needed. At this juncture, the Yulria theory of Zheng Yik, an innovative theory based on tradition, could become a theory capable of replacing Dong Hak. Zheng Yik thought, which is based on Yurjing studies and emphasizes principle, could, unlike Dong Hak, which emphasizes vital energy, be applied more to everyday problems. What was presented alongside Yulria thought in this period is also Kim Ji-ho's Bap thought. The Bap thought that rice is heaven was presented as a model of a philosophy of life more grounded in reality, as against the philosophy of life of Dong Hak, which was inclined toward the conceptual. Through Yulria thought, Kim Ji-ho sought to revitalize the liminality triggered by Dong Hak. Yulria may therefore be seen as the philosophy of life as liminality having been revitalized and appearing as a practical movement. Kim Ji-ho regarded the Zheng Yik thought of Kim Il-bu, which unfolded after the failure of Dong Hak, as the Yurjing studies alternative to Dong Hak, and took note of the Yulria thought of Zheng Yik. Although Kim Ji-ho founded the Yulria Society, and even served as its first president, Yulria was the most abstruse part, even among the Eastern thought represented by correlative thinking, and so he continually confessed his difficulty in explaining Yulria. Indeed, there has also been research that regards Dong Hak as the beginning of revitalization. In East Asia, the tradition of revitalization was common not only to Korea, but also to Japan and China. Revitalization theory, unlike the theory of liminality, which emphasizes the internal process of change in response to change, is a theory that explains the change in the process of response to external change. Revitalization theory was first introduced by the anthropologist Anthony F. C. Wallace in his monumental 1956 paper, Revitalization Movements. Just as an individual, when threatened with the possibility that his identity may dissolve, reorganizes and changes his own belief system on the basis of his strengths, puts the changed belief system into practice, and thereby changes his position in society, so to a society, when it meets a crisis in which its social identity may dissolve, revives the strengths of each society's existing cultural tradition, and thereby changes its social belief system. This Wallace named revitalization. According to Wallace, the change in a society's belief system occurs through the mezwe, which is the mental image possessed by a member of a society. According to Wallace, every member of a society, as a part of the social organism, comes to have a mental image, not only of the regularity of his own body, and of the actions his body performs, but also of the society and culture to which he belongs, and it is precisely this image that corresponds to the mezwe. Wallace regarded human society as a vast organism, and the mezwe is the way in which each member of society adapts to this social organism. The concept of the mezwe includes not only the perception of physical objects within the social environment, but also the perception of the way an individual adjusts in order to minimize given stress, and of the way he adjusts and reconfigures this labyrinth, together with the members of society. When a crisis of social identity comes, a crisis comes to this mezwe for the individual, and because this connects even to the crisis of the ideology that constitutes society, rather than being merely a material crisis, it comes to the members of society as a greater threat than a material crisis. To this, society responds with various religious revitalization movements, and some religious movements expand even into political movements. For the leaders of the countless colonial countries in the 19th and 20th centuries, when imperialism was expanding, what was most threatening was not the material crisis, but the crisis of identity. Traditions that had continued for thousands of years were degraded into superstition by Western civilization, and the respected leaders were reduced to swindlers who fomented superstition, so that the belief system of traditional society could no longer maintain the social order, and the individual's social status fell. irretrievably. For the general public, too, the collapse of tradition acted as strong mental stress. Even though the new Western belief system was, like the collapsed traditional belief system, a belief system coming from long tradition that could collapse at any time, in a situation where only their own belief system was negated. The method the general public and the leaders could choose was the appropriation of tradition, that is, revitalization that newly interprets the existing tradition. Revitalization was applied to time, space, and human beings alike. In the case of time, it appears as millenarianism, the movement holding that a new age will arrive, and in the case of space, it also becomes an earthly paradise movement holding that a new utopia will arrive. In human terms, syncretism, in which religious doctrines are blended, also appears, and non-resistance also appears politically. Most of the 19th and 20th century religious movements can be classified as types of revitalization, and in the case of Donghak, all of these types are synthesized. Revitalization theory set out from a theory that sought to evaluate the birth and development of religious organizations on the basis of an inquiry in 1952 into the Longhouse movement that appeared among the Iroquois in the early 19th century, which had been waged by Handsome Lake, the prophet of the Seneca, one of the Indian tribes. Just as the capitalist material culture of the West and Japan raised a crisis of identity in the Joseon society of the time, Joseon, which had known only the long clan law order centered on China as the whole of the world, so too, for the Indians, who had lived for long ages with cultural pride, the Western culture, and the Western people who toppled their own authority with guns and swords came as a great shock. For the Iroquois, the representative Indian tribe of the northeastern United States where New York is located, that shock came all the greater. Handsome Lake, who had been one of the leadership class of the Seneca, one of the Iroquois, was also a figure who had gravely undergone a crisis of identity under the colonial policy of the United States. The period in which Handsome Lake lived was a time when American gold mines were discovered and the gold rush was underway. With the emergence of this gold rush, the status of the Indians who in the past had made contracts state to state, on an equal footing with the United States, fell, so that they were reduced to a protectorate, just as Joseon too, which had lost its status as a state at the time of the Japan-Korea annexation, was reduced to a protectorate. What makes revitalization important in the study of Kim Ji-ho's thought is the point that the national thought treated by revitalization is the beginning of humanity's universal thought. Since any universal thought must set out from the thought of a particular people, in order to achieve a universal thought, the revitalization of national thought must first take precedence. The starting point on the road toward a thought of reconciliation and coexistence lies in the revitalization of national thought. The revitalization presented in Jungyik thought was precisely the reinterpretation of the tradition of the Joi. That Kim Ji-ha took note of Jungyik for the reinterpretation of tradition is because, in the modernization period, the three countries of Korea, China, and Japan sought to fuse Western thought through countless theories based on tradition such as Chinese essence, Western function, yet there was no theory that fundamentally reinterpreted tradition as Jungyik did. The Yulria thought of Jungyik was, as Zhang Jinhong said, a logic that consistently unifies tradition. The logic that Jungyik pursued was the consistency of the East Asian five phases system, that is Patay, Youngsang, and Yarkday. The Patay, Youngsang, and Yarkday of Jungyik were clearly elucidated by Zhangzhen, but they were already implied in Jungyik thought. This can be interpreted as the religious ideological change as mythos, logos, and theos of which Zhang Jinhong spoke, but the Jungyik interpretation has been expressed more mathematico-logically by Han Tae-dong. Kim Ji-ha is a form that expresses this in literary terms. Looking first at Han Tae-dong's explanation, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism are logically connected to one another as liminality. Han Tae-dong's research, which expressed Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism in mathematical logic, indirectly shows that Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism are not merely philosophies but scientific theories based on yin-yang and the five phases. The characteristics of Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Christianity become clearly evident in how they define the relationship of friend and foe. Confucianism, which delights in learning and practicing it in due time, and delights when a friend comes from afar and again visits, holds that the ruler must be ruler-like, and the subject must be subject-like, so that, in the relationship of friend and foe, friend is friend, and foe is foe, as against Spring Confucianism, which drives friend and foe apart like a repulsive force. Taoism, the long-standing archrival of Confucianism, holds that the way called the way is not the way, that being is non-being, and non-being is being, that the weakest water is the strongest, and that the ugliest person is the most beautiful, so that foe is friend and friend is foe, as against Taoism of explosive force and latent concealment, which arranges foe and friend symmetrically. Buddhism, the long-standing mediator of Confucianism and Taoism, asserts a total emptiness in which there is neither friend nor foe. Of course, Christianity, which brought about a great innovation in the triangular relationship of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, encompasses all of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, with respect to Buddhism, through the words, "Love your enemy." In the end, the Yulria manifested in the Zhengyik thought of which Kim Ji-ha speaks may be interpreted in the sense that the syncopation and harmony of mutually different systems of thought are logically achieved. Kim Ji-ha stated, in his acceptance remarks at the awards ceremony of the Zheng Zhiyang Literary Prize, that the poetry of Zheng Zhiyang could be an example of fusing mutually opposed systems of thought. What Kim Ji-ha, who felt theoretical difficulty in the theoretical unfolding of Zhengyik into Yulria thought presented as an alternative, may be seen as the aesthetics of Hunjiunul. The beginning of the aesthetics of Hunjiunul is said to be the Yangdong Chimzim Wall of Yandam Yangyu, who gave Kim Il-bu the occasion to create Zhengyik. Kim Ji-ha interpreted the shadow moves the heart moon of heaven, as the shadow changes the cosmos. The shadow of which Kim Ji-ha speaks is similar to the fold of which Heidegger spoke, and is used in very diverse senses. The white shadow was the unification of the contradiction of yin and yang, that is light and darkness, and was also the harmonization of the shadow of the life possessed by human beings with the brightness of the light possessed by God. The white shadow was also the resolution of long-standing rancor, and was also the harmony achieved by mutually different things, like the syncopation of the red devils. In the aesthetics of the white shadow, Kim Ji-ha develops even into a cosmic science of life. The cosmic science of life was introduced as Kim Ji-ha interpreted Junzhen thought, and interpreted the countless miracles and transformations that Junzhen showed. That Kim Ji-ha called Junzhen thought a cosmic science of life is because Zhengzhen, by actually applying to history and life the theory developed in Zhengyik, realized the original purport of Donghak, which is to save life. Indeed, Zhengzhen called his own thought Cham Donghak, and a study of Junzhen thought from the perspective of Cham Donghak has been carried out by Go Nam-sik. Although Kim Ji-ha explained the white shadow in diverse ways, if Junzhen thought is viewed from the standpoint of a cosmic science of life, the meaning that the white shadow holds can be better summarized from Dasun thought, which interprets Junzhen thought in 16 characters. First, the white shadow, in which the contradiction of yin and yang, that is light and darkness, appears as unification, can be explained by the expression, the mutual accord of yin and yang. What Kim Ji-ha, as a thinker of reconciliation and coexistence, wished to say about yin and yang as the basic principle of all things manifested in traditional thought, through the aesthetics of the white shadow, can be expressed as the mutual accord of yin and yang. Next, the white shadow, which expresses the shadow of the life possessed by human beings and the brightness of the light possessed by God, can be explained by the expression, the harmonious creation of God and humanity. What Donghak mentions with respect to Catholicism is that, although equality is good, the vertical relationship between priest and believer is more unequal than that between the Yangban and the commoner of the Joseon period, and so Sahak cannot be accepted. What Kim Ji-ha wished to express about the God-human relationship through the white shadow was the harmonious creation of God and humanity, in which God and human being each bring their strengths to life, as in Donghak, where anyone who merely recited the incantation could become a priest. Third, the meaning of the white shadow, that long-standing rancor is resolved, can appear as Hawan Song sang. that which not merely resolves grievance but leads all the way to coexistence. Haewon Songsang can be expressed as the thought of reconciliation and coexistence that Kim Ji-ha pursued. Finally, the aesthetics of the white shadow that can become the standard of a new civilization. Just as mutually different things achieve harmony, like the syncopation of the red devils can be expressed as Dotong Jingrang, when grievances are resolved and all mutually coexist, this can proceed to Dotong Jingrang, in which paths are mutually connected to all places. In Jung's thought, these four are mutually and organically connected. What makes Kim Ji-ha's white shadow noteworthy is the point that these four are mutually and organically connected. These four correspond also to Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Christianity, and, as Professor Hong Yang-hui elucidated, are also connected with the 5 phases manifested in Kim Ji-ha's poetry. Kim Ji-ha in fact drew forth much reconciliation and coexistence. Kim Ji-ha sought to reconcile tradition and modernity, and to bring the left and the right into coexistence. That he drew even a national aesthetics out of a democratization process in which there was only struggle will be the representative reconciliation and coexistence that Kim Ji-ha achieved. As appears in the film 1987, the event held at Seoul City Hall at the time of the June 29th declaration was not some materialism or materialist aesthetics, but the national aesthetics created under Kim Ji-ha's influence. Pung Mulgut, Lie Ju's Salpuri dance, Oh Yun's paintings, and Kim Young-dong's music. Even when left and right were in extreme opposition, the one who conversed with both sides was Kim Ji-ha, and he stated that this course of his was the Pung new spirit of the threefold accord of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, beginning in the past with Yeo Eun-hyung and Cho Man-sik, and, still earlier, with Cho Kai-won. Although Jang thought had also been criticized as more accommodating to reality compared with Dong Hak thought, Kim Ji-ha drew forth reconciliation and coexistence through Dong Hak and Jung's thought, national thought, that at the time was close to a taboo in the democratization camp.